Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Optimizing a Pythium Rotation Program, presented by PBI-Gordon and taught by Joseph Roberts, Ph.D. My name is Lisa Wick. I'm Senior Manager of E-Learning Programs here in Lawrence, Kansas. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's event. You'll be able to access that recording via follow-up email. Your audio is muted in this system, but we do encourage you to ask questions as we go along. You can do that one of two ways. You can type into the question answer box, or on the GoToWebinar control panel tab, you'll see there's a little round icon with the raised hand. You can click on that. That will let me know that you want to be unmuted to ask your question directly. In that GoToWebinar control panel is where you can find the question answer box, and you can also find handouts there. If it's minimized, you see just a narrow strip with an orange rectangle at the top, and when you click on that, it will open it back up and you'll be able to download those handouts. Today's session is eligible for education points, thanks to our friends at PBI-Gordon. At the end of the program, we'll give you a code that you'll use on the association's website to enter, and that will give you your points. We hope you find today's webinar valuable. It's brought to us in partnership with PBI-Gordon. With a full line of herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, growth regulators, and other products, PBI Corporation is a national leader in the professional turf and ornamental management industry. We thank them. Joe Roberts is an assistant professor and extension specialist in the Department of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Clemson University. Roberts earned bachelor's degrees in biology and chemistry from North Carolina State, a master's in plant biology and pathology from Rutgers University, and his Ph.D. in plant pathology from NC State. Roberts' research and extension program focuses on innovative methods to combat pathogens that impact both cool and warm season turf grasses. He has taught both webinars and seminars for GCSAA. Please join me in welcoming today's presenter, Joseph Roberts, PhD. Take it away, Joe.
All right, thanks so much for the introduction, and always appreciate the invitations. Webinars are a nice way to do that. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that's kind of near and dear to me, especially since I've relocated back to the Southeast over the last few years, looking at Pythiums and how they can impact both cool and warm season turf. I'm going to give examples for a lot of cool season references and work that we've done over the last several years, but I can also touch on some instances with warm season as well. And especially in the fact that we're seeing more issues with Pythium on particularly ultra-dwarf Bermuda grass putting greens, and through diagnostics that we performed here at my facility. So I'm located in Florence, South Carolina, and I'll allude to that location a little bit further down the line. But if you do happen to have any questions, following this webinar, my email is here on the slide here with Clemson, and then you could also reach out to us through at Clemson Turf Path on Twitter. So getting into our webinar here, there we go. All right, so thinking about this idea of looking at Pythiums as potential pathogens on both cool and warm season turf, you can think about this from an approach of both above ground and below ground portions of the plant. So say we've got a grouping of plants here, multiple tillers and root system here. If we're looking at, particularly in our area of the Southeast, we do experience a lot of both foliar and root impacting Pythiums. And if we're looking at, those foliar issues, on higher cut turf, especially in new seeding areas, we could see some damping off of new seedlings, as you can see here in a new area of cool season turf. And this could also be attributed to some blighting of the cool season turf in this case. But we can also see blighting occurring on closely mown turf as well. And this is actually an area of warm season, dormant ultra-dwarf Bermuda grass, where we would see some characteristic symptoms of Pythium. Now, in this case, one of the descriptors that we look for in the symptom development here is just the fact that you can clearly see that there are almost channels where these symptoms are running, and that's kind of gets at the idea of Pythiums and their love for water, and kind of moving with, in this case, sheeting of water across the putting green surface. Now, both foliar issues can be particularly problematic in terms of growing both cool and warm season turf, but we can also think about this from a standpoint of root issues that we can see as well. Similarly with Pythiums as well. Now, here we have some decline of the turfgrass stand that you can see here, again, on closely mown turf that we would associate with potential Pythium. And again, much like you could see here with the foliar symptoms, you can still see that this is kind of moving with a water pattern. We really don't have defined patches that we would associate with diseases like brown patch or summer patch. Here we have more of a regular thinning and just general areas of decline. And again, this is a lower area of the green space that is impacted here. And looking at this from a diagnostic perspective, we would clearly see the issues with Pythium here. Now, if we were trying to pull samples from this area compared to these areas outside where we wouldn't be seeing Pythium, you could kind of attribute that to what we're seeing here, a significant reduction in rooting from extensive Pythium development, and compared to a very healthy root system that's not impacted by these root pathogens. And if we were, from a diagnostic perspective on our end, we always look for, we'll try to pull out some of the healthy roots that we can find here. Obviously, here you're seeing a lot of detriment to this particular, profile. But in looking for diagnostics, one of the things that we look for often is the presence of these oospores, which are a key diagnostic feature in looking for Pythium in the roots. Now, we can find oospores often in root systems, but when we're thinking about diagnostics of Pythium as a significant pathogen really taking down turf, it would be obvious that there are several oospores within impacted roots. Oftentimes you'll also see darkening of the roots, the absence of root hairs, and in this case, this would be a very good descriptor for disease we call Pythium root rot. Not to be confused with Pythium root dysfunction, which is an issue that is primarily characterized on creeping bentgrass, on particularly newer stands of creeping bentgrass, where you can still see significant root production, but the absence of root hairs, and you can also see signs of Pythium with Pythium root dysfunction as well. Now, there are several different Pythiums that can cause Pythium disease. And those can impact both foliar and root issues, and they are categorized over varying severity. So we have some, Pythiums that can be more, virulent and cause more severe problems on cool season and warm season turf as opposed to others. So that is something that is important to think about in terms of variation of the population, and we're not dealing with one particular pathogen. Such as a disease like brown patch with Rhizoctonia solani, or dollar spot, where you have, particularly for cool season turf, we have, the Claridia jacksonii. So we're working with multiple different Pythiums that can cause these issues. Now, thinking about the drivers of Pythium development, and I've already alluded to this fact in the previous slides where we were showing the symptoms, one of the things that we talk about a lot with Pythium development is that these are waterborne fungi. So they really thrive in areas of high water. And while this would be a very irregular situation, these are some low-lying areas of our facility that often get flooded. These types of situations are just highly conducive for Pythium development. And thankfully, in our case, we actually have raised greens where they're not impacted by this flooding in this case, but areas of excessive water, being able to see, symptoms moving with water, those are often indicators of Pythium development, and signs that you should be, thinking about, or symptoms that you should be thinking about in terms of treatment. So if you, know that a weather event may be coming where you are going to have excessive rain, and you can get out ahead of that with a preventative fungicide application, that is definitely warranted. And we'll talk about that as we move through the webinar a little bit more detail, but definitely areas of high water or excessive water. When we're thinking about, other problems that can lie in the soil, in addition to just that overall, or heavy amounts of water, not just frequent rain or frequent rain is not always the indicator, for standing water and being a problem. It could be underlying issues within the soil that are impacting water movement through the profile. So, this is obviously not a root system that we want, in terms of a diagnostic sample. This is just, one that we may have received in where you have a significantly reduced root system. And there are a number of factors that can reduce that. And then in some cases, you may have, layering within that soil profile that will impede water movement and, getting water through that profile so that it's not being bound up in these upper layers. And again, creating a situation where you have excessive water to a point where you have, rapid Pythium development. And again, areas that are impacted by high water can also develop, black layer. Here's just an example where you have, extensive necrosis of roots. And again, these are areas where Pythiums can thrive. And again, just highlighting that comparison for, healthy root system versus the impacted root system with, again, Pythiums in this case, but, several soil-borne issues can cause root decline. Now, in thinking about other factors that may be, contributing to a water collection and being a problem, I'd like to kind of move back to Pythium blight development before we get into issues of root rot and root dysfunction. One of the things that we think about in terms of Pythium blight development is overcast conditions and really creating an environment where water can sit on the leaf blade. And again, that excessive amount of leaf wetness and constant, water or high humidity in and around the plant can really be a driver of Pythium blight development. And this is just an example of, some trial work that we've done over the years where we showed that shade can also be a significant issue. And I'm sure that, all attendees here can clearly see we have some very distinct squares here or rectangles in terms of these individual plots. And, here we have, really extensive thinning associated in addition to the overall discoloration of these plots. And then we also have some, greener areas that are seemingly healthy in comparison. This is on an ultra dwarf Bermuda grass green, and this picture was taken in August of 2021. Now, one thing that I can tell you is we do have some different treatments in this case looking at disease prevention and stress tolerance, but one of the big drivers here of the difference in turf quality is the presence of shade, where we had covered these plots to look at those detrimental effects. So what we're looking at here with the decline in turf is a 30% shade treatment during the month of July and August for a 2-year period. And you can clearly see that that shade is impacting, turf quality in a negative fashion. And one of the things that we also noticed from these shade treatments is that we were seeing an increase in Pythium blight during periods where we were covering. So during the months of August, where we have that 30% shade here, on our y-axis here, you can see the percent Pythium blight. And, while we're only looking at about 5% in our 30% shade and up to 10% in that August month, one of the things that we also noticed is that even after we removed those shade treatments in August and allowed for the turf to seemingly recover, throughout the later, early fall and late fall months, one of the things that we noticed even in December of the same year, in the absence of treatments, is that we were still seeing effects from those shade events in the summer. And we had an extensive Pythium blight epidemic that was, really tied to those areas where we had those shaded plots. So definitely something really interesting in terms of that relationship. And we know that, shade can have an impact on leaf drying and, leaf wetness periods. And again, those increased leaf wetness periods are going to be a really big driver for Pythium blight development. Now, so Pythium blight it can develop rapidly. And, from one of the things that we look at indicator wise is, we will incubate samples and look for pathogen development. And, whether it be cool season or warm season turf in this case, we'll see Pythium develop within 24 hours on that foliage, and you can see, you know, decline of the turf associated with that mycelial development in the case of these photos here. Now, in thinking about, you know, diseases of the roots, and oftentimes, you know, Pythium root rot is typically more problematic than we see Pythium blight. There are issues where we see Pythium blight and Pythium root rot occurring at the same time, and then that's really just a buildup of that Pythium inoculum in certain situations. But again, similar to you know, Pythium development in general, we associate Pythium root rot with excessive water events. And again, there are many different Pythiums that can be associated, you know, with that disease. And as far as symptoms occur, you know, thinking about, you know, cool or warm season turf, you know, often see irregularly shaped patches of declining turf. These can be tan, orange, or even yellow discoloration. Sometimes they can appear darker as they progress, and that's something that we see pretty often with creeping bentgrass. And can be, you know, somewhat patchy, but again, you know, pretty irregular in shape due to that nature of water moving over these areas. And then, you know, progressed disease can lead to thinning of the turf canopy. Now, again, you know, from a diagnostic perspective, we will look at that root system, and here you can clearly see lots of oospores, you know, in that infected root. Again, the absence of root hairs in this case, and, you know, just really a breakdown of that outside root tissue that we associate with extensive root rot development. You know, thinking about the symptoms that we could observe, here we have, you know, some root rot that's developed on creeping bentgrass, and we typically observe symptoms of Pythium root rot in June, July, and August, and really those really high temperature periods of the summer. But we typically associate that development with infection that occurred back in, you know, the spring months in April or May. You know, so here you can see some of those irregularly shaped patches, you know, just a little bit darker, a little bit orangey appearance here. You know, and again, if you were to look at these in a little bit closer from a diagnostic perspective, you could again see here a blow up of that picture where we have, you know, some thinning associated with that really intense infection of Pythium in this case. So looking at, you know, the diagnostic perspective, obviously we can see the clear reduction in rooting, you know, not roots that we would want from any turf during the summer months. And then looking at, you know, that root development and looking for that presence of oospores. So as far as ultradwarf bermudagrass Pythium root rot, you know, these are symptoms that we can observe year round, but typically from our perspective, we diagnose more Pythium root rot for warm season turf in the spring months and fall periods. So that can be April, May as the turf is transitioning, you know, in the summer, you know, being located here in South Carolina, and again in August, September, October, and so forth. This is actually a photo from a sample that we diagnosed with Pythium root rot in October of this past year. And I believe that this was also from similarly in the fall months period, but we diagnosed Pythium root rot on ultradwarf bermudagrass very frequently in April and May as well. So with that in mind and thinking about, you know, areas where Pythium might develop, you know, I did put in a quick poll here with 2 questions and thinking about other factors that could be impacting Pythium root rot. You know, so one question that I have for you all as a group is, you know, do you sample areas impacted by Pythium root rot for nematodes? Nematodes are a big issue where I'm located in the Southeast, and we do see relationships between areas that are impacted by Pythium root rot as well as other soil-borne fungi with the presence of certain nematodes. So, you know, happy to get your answers here, and we'll move into, you know, some of the discussion with that and control measures following the poll here.
Okay, do you want to guess on what answer is going to be more prevalent on this one, Joseph?
I'm going to say yes.
You are, okay. Well, they're voting, and I'm closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, just by the hair.
And I didn't vote. I didn't sway their input it out
Wow,
there.
that is very close, but I guess I was right. On that notion, if you have sampled, I do also have a follow-up is, what types of nematodes were found? If you could really pinpoint one particular issue at your location, did you find more sting nematode, root knot nematode, lance nematode, or just others? I picked those three as those are more of our frequent categories as really detrimental. But obviously, we know that there are other detrimental nematodes as well.
You did so well before. Uh, this one's harder to guess, though, right?
I'm gonna say sting nematode.
And closing the poll. The votes are still coming in. They're slowing though. Okay.
All right, so very close tie there with sting and root knot. And interestingly enough, I did expect some lance. I didn't expect it to be high, and then obviously, a fair bit of others. Now, so in thinking about that other category, obviously this could be ring nematode, spiral nematode, sheath nematode. There's a lot of different nematode species that can impact, both cool and warm season turf, and we see them on a frequent basis. But I would say out of the last 3 years that I have been here at Clemson University, and really the bulk of the time that I've been doing work with nematodes, sting is definitely a prevalent pathogen, and probably our most detrimental. It's very problematic at very low at low thresholds. But we do see more of an association and diagnostics with root knot, but I see more sting nematode samples in general where we have declining turf. So, but on that notion and thinking about other factors for root infection, I do want to allude to the fact that, we do see, the association with these. And we have some ongoing research where we're looking at this, just thinking about the presence of certain nematodes. Particularly, I have a photo here of an adult root knot nematode. And one of the things about root knot nematode is that it actually burrows into the root system, whereas sting nematodes typically feed on the outer portion. They're what we refer to as ectoparasites. And then we have, lance and root knot nematode, which are endoparasitic. So root knot nematode is a sedentary endoparasite, and then lance nematode is migratory. And we're really interested in the occurrence of some of these endoparasitic nematodes and whether or not they're creating a possible infection court for root diseases like Pythium root rot, particularly in the case of this webinar. But we're also doing some work with take all root rot and mini ring as well. Now, to date, we have seen an association, and really what we're thinking about, just additional factors for root infection is that nematodes can be highly detrimental to promoting root growth, as many of the attendees here probably know. And when we're thinking about ways to mitigate damage from diseases, even like Pythium, is anything that you can do to enhance rooting is hopefully going to have a beneficial impact on reducing the occurrence of disease. So, if you can eliminate root knot nematodes, sting nematodes, lance nematodes, or others from the equation, you may be able to better prevent diseases like Pythium root rot from occurring. This is just another example of root knot egg masses within a root, here as an example. And there has been some really interesting research out of the University of Florida where they had looked at co-infection with Pythium root rot and different nematode species. And oddly enough, in some cases, they found that while both can be highly detrimental, there were instances where the co-infection really didn't have an impact, or in the case of some instances, had varying impacts on the development of Pythium root rot. So it seems like there obviously is a more research that's needed to understand these, but when we talk about nematodes as a detriment to root health, that is really the extent of what we can say at this point, from research in our program. Is obviously nematodes are highly detrimental to root systems, especially when they're above threshold. And if you can eliminate or reduce those populations where you can enhance rooting through any number of means, whether that be cultural or chemical means to mitigate those nematode pathogens, we hope that we would have a beneficial reduction in the possibility of Pythium root rot as well. Now, just in general, from a standpoint of root rots and Pythiums, there are a number of cultural management considerations when we're thinking about designing a plan for action. One of those could be verticutting and just, increasing, density, removing some of that organic matter from that upper portion of the profile and, creating more growing points for that turf to fill in. Irrigation scheduling can be, hugely impactful. Again, thinking about that leaf wetness period from a foliar standpoint, but then also thinking about timing of waterlogging soils. If you're over irrigating situations, especially on greens, these can be highly favorable conditions for diseases like Pythium root rot to come in. If we're thinking about, again, areas that can be beneficial to the roots and or those, upper regions of the rhizosphere, aerification schedules, whether that be, core aerification in the case of the picture that I'm showing here with actually removing, some of that organic matter, or even solid tining and getting more oxygen into the root zone. Again, reducing that water logging, getting that movement of water through the profile so that it's not sitting in and around that plant. That's going to have a big impact on reducing the potential for Pythiums to develop. And then, fans can be really helpful for reducing stress, but can also reduce leaf wetness period. And then, other ways of thinking about moisture within the soil profile is utilization of certain instruments in the field to adequately measure soil moisture on a regular basis, and then thinking about that turf health aspect with these different cultural practices. But when we're thinking about an idea of a rotation program, obviously that's the title of the presentation here. I'm sure there are lots of questions about fungicide options and ways to how are we going to integrate all of these options into my yearly program so that I don't have a potential outbreak of Pythium to develop. Now, oftentimes when we talk about fungicides, we could, we like to group our fungicides, and we have different types like the phosphites, and we have different, what I characterize here as true Pythium fungicides in terms of Segway, Banal, Subdue, Union, which is also, including of Segway, and this newer product called Serrata. But then we also have, the QOIs and Insignia, Heritage, Fame, and so forth. So you do have, some different options. And oftentimes, when we're thinking about building a program, I like to start with phosphites, and they can be, hugely beneficial. And, part of the start of that is just thinking about, applications and where they are applied. So, we've talked about, Pythium developing in the foliage. We've talked about Pythium developing in the roots. And, whether or not you're working with those two different options is going to impact, the carrier volume that you're choosing. So if we're looking at foliar Pythium, that's when we can get away at applying in 1 to 2 gallons per 1,000 square feet as a carrier volume. But if we're working with root dysfunction or root rot, that's when we need a higher carrier volume, or we, utilize this 1 to 2 gallons and then water in our treatments with 1/8 of an inch of irrigation. Now, what I'm going to do today for the rest of this meeting is I'm going to discuss some of our work that we performed here at Clemson PD Rec, and I thought that it would be really important to kind of give you a sense of where we're located. So we're just here in the northwest portion of Florence County, just outside Florence, South Carolina, and we're about an hour and a half from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is probably a location that most attendees are familiar with. Now, when we're thinking about a challenging environment to grow turf, this is probably one of as good as it gets in terms of We can grow a lot of different turf species here, much like we talk about the transition zone, but we do grow them, equally poor at different times of the year. And this is, just harping on that idea of the disease triangle. In this case, we have varying hosts. We have both cool and warm season grasses that we have established here, and we have, a very good pathogen population. And there are different times of the year where the environment is highly conducive for disease to develop. And to give you a sense of what our facility looks like, here we have, 2 of our creeping bentgrass greens, and you can see here in the summer months that this is all declined from Pythium root rot. And then here you can see our warm season greens not impacted at this time, but I'm going to discuss trials from this location today. Now, in getting back to those fungicide options, I do want to start with the phosphites. And some may talk about the phosphites as the backbone of a fungicide program, and I do think that they're highly valuable tools when it comes to not only managing the possibility of Pythiums to develop, but also just from their enhancement of plant stress response, just general turf quality. We've seen a lot of benefits from the incorporation of phosphites over the years in our work. And just getting back to that trial where I had showed the shade, part of that trial was looking at phosphites, both pigmented and non-pigmented, for their possibility of reducing drought stress, shade stress in the case, and we did see some responses with that. Now, obviously, the shade was highly detrimental regardless of treatment, but when we did see that really extensive Pythium development in the December months of 2021, we did see that even despite the applications here, they were not applied. We stopped our phosphite applications in the summer months, just like we had stopped the shade treatments. But even a few months out of those treatments, we saw that the phosphites in this case, all of them, had some benefit in reducing the Pythium compared to the non-treated control here, which you can clearly see in this particular plot, comparison. So again, phosphites can be, highly beneficial, and a lot of questions as to the residual here with the, being so late, but we do see benefits, right around application, but in this case, we're seeing some long-term effects in the case as well. Now, if we're looking at, control of Pythium root rot, preventive control is definitely ideal, and timing is critical. If we're thinking about, the timing where the environmental conditions are typically conducive, for creepy mint-grass in the summer months, we need treatments every 14 to 21 days, especially here in an environment where the environmental stress during July and August is very conducive for Pythium root rot. And I'm going to show you some pictures where we had a lot developed here in a minute. But if you're, again, thinking about timing of heavy rainfall, you've got some in the forecast, and maybe you're getting to the end of that window, where you are doing your typical preventative sprays, you may want to look at, an additional application just to make sure that those roots are protected. Now, this is in thinking about, the discussion around phosphites, I have run into some situations where I've worked with managers that were on a phosphite program and they have an outbreak of Pythium root rot. And this is where, this idea that I'm a firm believer in phosphites being beneficial, but phosphites as a complete part of your program are not going to be the be all end all for preventing and curing Pythium root rot. So, I like to see them in programs regularly, but we really need to make sure that we're incorporating what I categorized earlier as those true Pythium fungicides, well timed throughout your season to make sure that you're going to prevent those potential outbreaks. Now, if we're getting into curative control measures, that's where we're going to see, some variation in efficacy. Over the years, we've had, instances where we worked with ethazole or terazole, and then now we have some of these newer ones, but like cyazofamid or picobutyrozox and Serrata, and then Subdue Max or mefenoxam as well. So, typically, I'm going to, what I would recommend in terms of curative control is you're going to see some data here for Segway and Serrata, and then, some varying responses with Subdue. But again, just know that those curative controls can definitely vary in efficacy if you're dealing with an outbreak that's occurring. And if you're dealing with an outbreak that you see is active, this, retreatment interval is going to need to be more frequent to make sure that you're getting ahead of that population. Now, for our trials here at PD Rec, and just thinking about creeping bentgrass management, we do all of our work on A1 creeping bentgrass, and we mow from anywhere from 1/10 to 0.135, 3 to 5 times weekly. I say 3 to 5 times weekly because we do back off of our mowing schedule during the intense periods of the summer, just to reduce some of the stress. We roll our greens 2 to 3 times weekly. We're on a fertilization schedule about 1/8 to 1/4 pound every 14 days. We apply wetting agent, again, which I recommend on a 28-day schedule. We regulate our greens according to label recommendations. And typically we use Daconil or ProStar as a means to control foliar diseases, because in the conditions that we're going to discuss regarding Pythium root rot, we do see a lot of brown patch development. So we use a rotation of these two to hopefully control that brown patch and look solely at Pythium root rot development. Now, when I first started here in 2019, and my first season being 2020, we put together a trial, looking at some different treatments here. And as you can see here, our application dates are on a 14-day schedule beginning in April, where we typically think about, Pythium becoming active as that bentgrass is coming out of winter. We have heavy rains here in the spring that can be, again, promoting of these Pythium populations, and then carrying into June. This is an early stopping date because we're seeing symptoms well into July and August, but this allows us to look at those symptoms early. And here we're looking at Segue, which is a cyazofamid, Union, which is cyazofamid with azoxystrobin, Insignia and Paraclostrobin, Signature, Extra Stress Card, Tidal Fight, Banol, Subdue. Again, varying applications, but all looking at these 14-day application windows. And just looking at areas where we had some pretty decent root rot development, about 10% disease in our plot area on the 20th of July. Again, that's well beyond our application window. But here you can see that Segue, Union, both containing cyazofamid, having a substantial reduction compared to the non-treated control in this case. Insignia early on having a reduction, but no different from the non-treated check on the final rating date. And same with the phosphites here. As that pressure really picked up, we didn't really see much of a reduction from the phosphites applied alone. In this case, we didn't really see much of a benefit from the Banol application, and we did see a benefit from the Subdue at 1 fluid ounce per 1,000 square feet. So again, what we're looking at here, especially with this last rating date, we're a month out of our last application, so that's something to consider. And it's possible that we would see less breakdown of some of these products, if applied continually throughout the season. But we do see really strong residual out of Segue in this early year.
So, Joe.
Yes.
The question here is: have you done any trials with hydrogen peroxide on Pythium root rot?
So I have not done trials with hydrogen peroxide for Pythium root rot. I have looked at it, slightly for previous issues with bacterial disease, as I did a lot of work for that on bentgrass back in 2010 to 14. But I have not looked at it for root rot at this point. But very good question. Just thinking about how some of these other compounds could break down, particularly the phosphites with phosphorus acid. Good point of question. So.
Thank you.
Yes. So in thinking about some of these other products, and again looking at those 14-day schedules, which is what we need here in the months, particularly in June, July, and August. We also have a preventive trial looking at root rot development here in 2022, just last summer. So again, looking at some of those similar compounds that I showed in the previous trial, but also looking at this newer compound called Serrata is the trade name, the active ingredient picarbutyrozox. But what we're looking at here is just the total area under disease progress curve. So we're looking at multiple ratings kind of summarized into this AUDPC value that I'm showing here. And I'll show you what these plots look like so you can see that, by the end of this trial, this non-treated control had high Pythium root rot development. And again, you can see that through this very high AUDPC. Now, our treatments were initiated a little bit late, so you could say that this is what we call an early preventative, where we're not seeing symptoms, but Pythiums could be active. And all of our treatments were applied in, much like the previous trial that I did not specify, we use a 2.1 gallon per carrier volume, per 1,000 square feet carrier volume, and we water in all of our treatments with 1/8 of an acre inch of water. Now, thinking about, the new compounds versus Segway, I had mentioned Segway being very efficacious in our previous trial, and we saw that again this year. A little bit more disease, towards the end of the trial. And then, looking at this newer compound, picarbutyrozox, we've seen very good Pythium root rot prevention, in reducing, Pythium root rot as well on creeping bentgrass. Now, again, the older compounds like Banol or Subdue in this case, a little bit less control, but still less than our non-treated control in this case. But not acceptable in terms of turf quality, much like we saw out of the Serrata and Segway, and even Union in this case. Union not being different from Subdue or Banol, but you can see here also not different from these treatments as well. Now, in thinking about timing of your applications, obviously you're limited within the confines of the label, where you can only apply so many Serrata applications, so many Segway applications in a given calendar year. And that's where we wanted to look at this alternation schedule. So we have a 14-day program where you would say Segway was applied on day 1, Serrata was applied on day 14, Segway on day 28, Serrata on day 42, and so forth. And you can see here that that alternating schedule was the same as Serrata by itself. So this essentially is half the applications of this treatment with Serrata, but we're still filling up that 14-day window with the Segway in this case. So this is a great way to look at extending your overall window of protection, especially as we've gotten into years where we have these extended summer-like conditions that are moving well into fall months, making the management of both even warm season grasses in many cases challenging. But again, this will give you more root protection by being able to use an alternating schedule, whereas in the past we were highly reliant on Segway as a main tool for reducing Pythium root rot. Now, I'll also get into what these plots look like. So here we have some photos taken on the 3rd of August of last year. And here you can see we have looked at ways to enhance turf health. As you can see here, we've spiked these greens with a pull behind spiker, just trying to alleviate some of the environmental stress. But you can clearly see a lot of this discoloration, significant thinning here, and even in this case, this is an alleyway outside the plot, so all of this is untreated in terms of our trial work, and very extensive root rot development. And here you can see, we did get some very good control out of these programs. A little bit of root rot here late in the season with this, bottom part of the union, but the rest of the plot looking pretty good. Segway, a little bit of discoloration here. That alternating program, Serrata by itself, all looking, really good in terms of Pythium control. And then, here a little bit of discoloration, irregular from the, Subdue and Banol in this case, but still not to the extent of the non-treated. So again, just that gives you a sense of some things that we have seen with our creeping bentgrass prevented root rot trials in 2022. Now, we've also, gotten questions about curative control, and I, thinking about, building programs and trying to budget for some of these applications. We do get questions about that, and we have done some curative control. Here, we're looking at some curative control with Serrata and early experimentation. But here you can see our non-treated, again, AUDPC, that total amount of disease. Looking at a little bit higher rate of Serrata in this case, but seeing a significant reduction in disease. And then when we're tank mixing with a phosphite in this case, seeing an even higher beneficial reduction. whereas that phosphite alone was no different from the non-treated. So as for this trial, we're looking at treatments that were initiated in August, when we saw about 5 to 10% disease. Again, we're looking at curative control, and again, that 2.1 gallon carrier and post-application irrigation with 1/8 of an inch of water. And this is just to give you a sense of what we're observing. So here's that non-treated control. Here's the Serrata by itself. Definitely a reduction, but not to the point, of acceptable. And here we have the Serrata tidal phyte combo, and then the tidal phyte by itself. Now, if we're thinking about, again, that Pythium root rot chemical control, just want to reiterate, that preventive control is ideal. The 14 to 21 day interval, utilizing an alternation of these, the Serrata Serrata segue, even incorporating, subdue and banal into rotation, you're probably going to get some really good control there. But I do think that given the control that we've seen out of these newer products like Serrata and even, Segway, that those need to be a backbone of an area where you have a strong history of Pythium root rot. Phosphites definitely also need to be incorporated, as they have a lot of benefits and they can be helpful for Pythium root rot development. But I do think that, we need these more true Pythium fungicides, as a control measure. Now, again, I'm not alluding much to the QOIs in the case of chemical control here, but in that first trial, we did show some really good control with Insignia and other QOIs. And again, those can be highly beneficial for Pythium root rot, but particularly with managing creeping bentgrass in the transition zone like this, those can be also beneficial for diseases like brown patch, which are also going to be a likely issue if you're dealing with environmental conditions that are conducive to disease. So, one of the questions that I get, obviously we're harping a lot on chemical control, and the idea behind this webinar is looking at building a rotation plan. I can obviously discuss rotation of Serrata and Segway in the case of that alternation, and those being highly effective. Rotating in subdue or banal can also be beneficial, but that is something really important. So resistance is an issue with Pythiums. They can develop resistance to these fungicides, and that resistance risk is definitely high. So you definitely want to rotate through those tools. And then again, those well-timed applications of Serrata and Segway being, highly beneficial, as they've been shown in our previous trials. But even outside of those applications of, those newer chemical controls, I do get questions about, other tools, outside of the cultural management that we've discussed, and, these specific chemical compounds. We've done some work looking at root health. So, one area that I want to mention before we get into some of the benefits of root health applications for biologicals or biorationals is just this idea of that post-application irrigation. And just thinking about, Pythium root rot as a root disease, but we often see diseases like brown patch develop in areas where we have Pythium root rot. We've done work looking at these compounds for post-application irrigation, and we have issues where we see foliar diseases occurring where we also have root diseases. So, just thinking about a little bit of a case study here, can foliar blight and root rot occur simultaneously? And I want to provide an example. This particular plug, I can tell you, I remember this sample coming in, and I remember, working with this site, and you can clearly see mycelium occurring on the foliage, but I also saw extensive root rot developing within the same sample. And in the case of this, we do still have some pretty green tissue, coming through here, but, Pythium foliar blight being a concern, I did still recommend an application watered in this case, because we want to protect those roots first and foremost, and hope that the foliage will, somewhat recover. And we've seen benefits to, some of our products watered in. This is looking at brown patch development in 2020 with that same trial where we had shown the root rot development. So even watered in, we're still seeing a reduction in brown patch from Union, which contains azoxystrobin, from Insignia, which is pyraclostrobin. Very, good control of brown patch, even when watering in these compounds for Pythium root rot. Now, we often see yellow spot occurring as well. We don't really see, any impact of the watered in this case. But typically with azoxystrobin, we can see higher impacts of yellow spot occurring in creeping bentgrass.
Quick question
Now,
for you.
yes.
Is there any difference in control when watering in at night versus watering in immediately after application?
So that is a great point. All of our applications, we water in immediately. And again, that's going to allow that product to move down within the soil profile before it dries on the foliage. You don't really, if you can minimize the impact of that product drying on the foliage, that's just going to enhance its movement down into the root zone where that pathogen is most active, and you're going to get the most of that active ingredient down into the root zone. So you want to make sure that you're maximizing movement of that material down into the root zone. I can't say that watering in at night is not going to be beneficial if that is your only option, but we always recommend immediate application. And by immediate, I mean as soon as our sprayer goes across the plot, a hose is immediately going over our individual plot areas to water that product into the root zone. So, before we, get to the end here, I do want to mention some work that we've done with some of these, what I call added value products or biorationals. And, we've done a fair bit of work looking at this for foliar and root diseases, but I'm going to harp on our root disease work here, just kind of as an end. And this may be an option of adding into your program if you have interest in the future, and often something that I get questions about. So, Bacillus subtilis are the active ingredient in Rhapsody. This is a living bacteria. Zeo is a Pseudomonas, also a living bacteria. And then we have products like Zelto, which is a registered nematicide, but it is what we categorize as a non-living bacteria. So it's actually a heat-killed suspension and spent fermentation media. And then we've also done some work with, some spray adjuvants, or in this case, salicylic acid, which can have some benefits as well. To harp on that, or to introduce that, I wanted to mention Joe Doherty's work while we were at the University of Maryland looking at Bacillus subtilis. He's now with Syngenta as their research and development in the Northeast. But we did some work looking at a field trial where we were looking at, again, some industry standards for Pythium root rot control, and then we're also looking at this Bacillus subtilis. And to get understanding of this, we looked at some sampling, and we were trying to actually quantify this living bacteria and then associate it with potential control that we had observed in Pythium root rot. And one of the things that we saw early on is that we did see a beneficial increase. So by actually quantifying the DNA of this particular strain of bacteria, we showed that we were able to build this population, over time, over a 2-year study. Even when only applying it during the summer, we still saw a buildup of the population in the winter months. So that's something important to note in thinking about, potentially building up a beneficial inoculum. But thinking about this in the overall presence of the vast array of bacteria that can exist in these soil rhizospheres, we didn't really see it register within the population here until the final rating date in August of 2020. Now, I don't really want to belabor the point on that. I want to get in more into the control. And here you can see, again, this is our AUDPC, and this is early, in the application periods of 2019, and then, subsequently in 2020. And here you can see that, Segway, again, our standard here, having the highest reduction in disease in 2019 and in 2020. But our weekly applications of Rhapsody were no different in 2019. However, this was what we call a low pressure year, and we didn't really see any benefit in the 2020, where this was actually the point where we had the highest recovery of that, population buildup of that beneficial bacteria. So a lot of questions in terms of those beneficial bacteria. May be beneficial early on in the season, but definitely, something to think about in the future. And we've continued some of this work since I've, moved to Clemson here, looking at some other biorationals. And this is actually some work from last year, looking at root rot, and here we're looking at Azoxy Bio, which is a combination of azoxystrobin with a biorational, and then those Zelto combinations that I had previously mentioned, Zelto being that heat-killed Burkholderia. And here you can see, on multiple rating dates with our treatments initiated on the 5th of June and applied throughout the summer, applying them very similar to the way that we apply our chemical applications. On the final rating date on August 5th, we had very high Pythium root rot. Here you can see 60% in our non-treated control, a little over 70 in this particular treatment. Very, high development. And we did see a little bit of a breakdown with our treatments, whereas our segue held up pretty strongly in terms of reducing disease. But if you look at some of these earlier ratings in July, and even mid-July, we're seeing that some of these biorationals are actually holding up compared to the non-treated. So in this case, that combination of that select fight and Zelto being, beneficial here, no different than the segue on this 7/19 date. So, there is a possibility of some of these biorationals protecting the roots, but if incorporating them into a rotation program, much like the main topic today, I would look at them more early season when the pressure is a little bit low, and then, obviously incorporate those chemical management options that I talked about earlier into the later season. So here we have our pictures taken on the 20th of August. Here you can see again that extensive root rot development in our non-treated control, but again, some fairly good control out of our Azoxy Bio, that Zelto, with the select fight here. And again, comparing it to segue, this segue plot doesn't look all that great, but what we're seeing here, this is brown patch that had come in. This is all brown patch. But again, if you look outside the brown patch, we do have some pretty good density, but we also do see some yellow spot development in the case of this as well. So if we're thinking about, biologicals as we're summing things up here with the webinar, and for root health, these can accumulate in the soil, and we have some data to support that, and may be protective, but, they're not a sole, protector. Really, if you're dealing with issues of Pythium root rot, biologicals, incorporating them early may provide some benefit, but you still need those chemical control tools to really have a strong reduction in root rot, like I had mentioned. They may be a viable tool in a rotation or tank mix, but definitely want to abide by those labels to look for possible interactions between true fungicides and these living or non-living biorationals. But we obviously need some more research, and hopefully we'll have some more data on that in the years to come. But just in generally, Pythium root rot wrap up, preventive measures, can't harp on that enough, definitely being ideal. Spring applications for bentgrass can be important. We've even looked at earlier applications for ultra dwarf Bermuda grass in February and March as being beneficial. Again, looking at prevention, a few months ahead of when these populations develop. Coupling those within those proper cultural practices, just again to support better growth. And if utilizing these cultural methods to support better growth, you're going to get better chemical control response from these applications that I had mentioned in the past. We do recommend controlling nematode populations, again, to promote rooting, but we haven't really been able to discern an interaction between Pythium root rot or Pythiums with the specific nematodes from our research. Products like Sazafamid, Picarbutyrazox, potassium phosphate, and others, definitely have shown some control of root rot in our trials, and I definitely recommend incorporating them. And again, utilizing all of these different active ingredients is really important to developing a rotation program so that you can, adequately prevent resistance, at your particular site. We do still recommend phosphites, but recommend these more true Pythium fungicides when conditions are significantly or environmental conditions are severe for promoting Pythium root rot. Obviously, we want to do more beneficial or research to understand these beneficial bacteria, but we've kind of harped on where they may be most beneficial in your program. So with that, I know we're coming up here towards the end, and I can stick around for questions. I hope that provided some really good information for you all in terms of possible product selections for your rotation. at your particular facilities. But again, just want to reiterate that my contact information is here on the last slide if you have any questions following the webinar here today. And again, thank you to the attendees and thanks to GCSAA for offering this invitation for me to present.
Well, thank you for providing all that information. If anybody has questions, now would be the time. I'm going to go ahead and move to this slide because in this instance, you need that 999 code because you're going to go there and enter it on the GCSA website. So that code is 999-24700-32689. And that is going to let you enter your education points on the GCSA website. When you go there, I'm trying to see if I'm logged in. I am. Okay, let's show that. Ta-da. Looks like this. And when you're logged in, your profile comes up here at the top. And when you click on this pull down, submit your points is where you want to go. And when you pull that up, it will give you an affidavit where you can put in your code. And if anybody's listening to this in the future, put in the date that you're listening, not today's date when we presented it. What is the best chemical rotation for Pythium root dysfunction?
So, Pythium root dysfunction, while I didn't harp on that, that is an area where the QOIs can still be beneficial. Cyazofamid is definitely still going to be effective against Pythium root dysfunction, but, applications like Insignia or Heritage or, azoxystrobin, pyraclostrobin there can be highly beneficial for root dysfunction. So again, still recommend getting those applications started early in the season to get those roots protected. And again, we like to start with the QOIs and then utilize the cyazofamid later in the season because I believe that the cyazofamid is going to have a better protection against potential root rot that would typically be more apparent during the summer months. So I have not done any work with root dysfunction for that newer active in picarbutyrozox, or Serrata is that trade name. So I would imagine that it may have some activity, but it's not something that I can really discuss for our particular work because those are some differential Pythium species that cause those two different diseases.
Okay, very good. I'm looking to see if anybody else has their hand raised. One was to repeat the code, and I've put that here on the slide. I want to thank Joe for teaching today. I want to thank PBI-Gordon for making this event possible. I want to remind you all that registration is still open for Orlando. We are getting things a little hectic here in Lawrence, Kansas at headquarters. There's a lot of bins, there's a lot of tape guns going, things are happening. Joe is getting ready to teach. He and Jim Kearns are going to be teaching. So don't wait till it's too late is part of the title. That wasn't me being funny on the registration. They are teaching Monday, so kicking off the week. We do have more live webinars coming up here in the next 2 days. If you use oxydiazonon, you might want to join us tomorrow. Stuff is happening there. It's government affairs regulatory briefing. They're a bunch of Joe's colleagues at different universities are gonna talk. Brosnan, Travis Gannon, and we got Frank Wong and G11 from Bayer and MVU talking. And then Albert Kopenhofer is going to talk about ABW. So lots of educational events that can help you at your golf course. What's the highlight of your seminar that you and Jim are teaching, Joe?
Oh, there will be many different highlights, but if you are dealing with warm season soil-borne diseases, mini ring, take all, Pythium root rot, you name it, we'll cover them in that seminar.
Excellent. We appreciate you teaching for us there. Looking forward to getting out of this gray weather and having some sun in Orlando, maybe. Ooh, I shouldn't jinx this.
Yes, don't do that.
I am not seeing any other questions today. Do you have any closing remarks for us?
I guess just to add definitely prevention is key. And if you want to utilize my contact information and reach out with specific, programs, I'm happy to address questions beyond this. So.
Excellent. We appreciate everyone joining us today. Hope to see you in Orlando. If so, safe travels to everyone. If not, we'll see you online again soon.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Very
Talk
good.
to you later.
Thank you.
Stay well, everybody.